Welcome to the Contagious Code Podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by my dear friend Daniel Afonso. Daniel and I met in India some time ago, and ever since we've just been really, really good friends. And so I'm really excited for you to listen to this episode or watch it, because Daniel sits on the program committee of various tech conferences put together by Git Nation, things like React Day Berlin, React Summit, JS Nation, and a number of others. Daniel is a conference speaker himself, but is also on the speaker selection panel. And so in our time together today, we talk about that. We talk about how does one even get into speaking at tech conferences? What makes a good proposal to submit to a call for papers? What even is a call for papers? Do you have to write a paper? What about titles and abstracts? What works? What doesn't work? We really outline like reproducible formulas, steps, protocols, whatever you want to call them, that you can use to get accepted to speak at conferences if that's your thing, or to just understand how it works. We also talk about Daniel's process, what he uses, how he gets speaking spots. We also talk about some of his TLDR, or TLDL, I guess. Too long, don't listen. This is all about conferences, speaking at conferences, imposter syndrome, learning how to speak at conferences, learning about the topic. Yeah, it's conferences. Of course, these are code conferences, and so that's the focus. Earlier in the week, we went pretty deep with Guillermo Rauch on technical stuff. This is definitely more on the community side, so I hope you enjoy it. Now, I'd like to offer this to all of you at zero cost. Of course, there are costs involved, and this is very much separate to my day job. So let's thank the sponsors that make all of this sustainable. This podcast is sponsored by Code Crafters. Code Crafters is a great tool, really. Their way of teaching is very similar to my way of teaching. What I mean by that is, like, my most popular talk ever is called Deconstructing React. And it's where I teach people how React works by implementing React. We write a bunch of React code, but we never import React. Instead, we define it with const React equals, and then we go from there. That's on YouTube somewhere. But the point I'm trying to make is Code Crafters teaches you how to level up your coding like this. Like, you'll implement things like Docker and Git from scratch in a language that you know, like TypeScript or Python, so you fully understand the mechanism. That's free, but there's a paid version, and if you use our link, you get 40% off. And that link is tej.as/codecrafters, tej.as/codecrafters. The podcast is also sponsored by Stately. Stately is a visual state machine builder that then you can use to generate code for your applications. It makes your applications way more predictable. Things like network errors and when to retry and how to back off. You can model all of that beautifully with their visualizer and then turn it into code. If you want to give that a try, go to stately.ai. Finally, we're partnered with That Conference. That Conference is a family of conferences that happen twice a year, and we're giving away up to 5 tickets. So if you want a spot at that conference, not a speaking spot, just an attending spot, please share this on social media, leave up to a 5-star review, comment on the podcast, and send proof of any of that to me on X, formerly Twitter, and you'll enter a raffle to win that. Thank you for sticking around, and now for my discussion with Daniel Afonso. Daniel Afonso, what an honor, man! I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. We've spent so much time together at so many conferences, and every single time it's been great vibes. So I'm really happy you're here.
Thank you for having me. The pleasure is all mine. I always love to chat with you. So,
thank you. Yeah. For the listeners, I'm sure so many people know you based on your conference presence and so on, but I wonder if you could do a short introduction to who you are. You know, you're a developer advocate, you're an author, you're a speaker, you're so many things, in as many words or as few words as you'd like. Why don't you give us a little bit of an intro and then we can go from there.
okay, so let's start with the basics. I'm Daniel Afonso. I'm based in Portugal. I live in a city called Coimbra, which, for people who don't know Portugal, or no, it's the 3rd biggest city in Coimbra, in Portugal. I'm working as a developer advocate at this company called OLX. I've been there for almost 2 years by now. 2 years go by real quick. This was my first job working as a developer advocate here, and DevRel was kind of always been my goal when I started my career as a developer like 4 or 5 years ago. So it was one of those things when I learned about it, I was like, okay, this is where I want to go. This is where I want to be, because I'm passionate about educating developers. I'm passionate about the developer community. So that's kind of where my DevRel journey started. Other stuff about me. Yeah, because of this DevRel journey, I like to write. I wrote a book called State Management with React Query. It was released in May last year. It was a personal goal of mine and something that I had a ton of fun doing it. And I like to speak at conferences, like you like you already mentioned. That's like the other way that paved around, and that's also the thing of how I came to know DevRel, because I was attending a conference, which coincidentally I'm wearing its shirt right now, which is Genation, which happens here in Coimbra, and well, I think we can give spoiler
Yeah, we
already on
can.
that, where you'll be speaking this year. And
That's
I'm
right.
actually organizing the JavaScript track. Another surprise here because I haven't announced this anywhere yet. So surprise there. And yeah, I was attending conference. I was seeing people speaking on someone, and I was like, "Oh, there's this role called developer advocate," and these people come to go to conferences and teach people about stuff they're passionate about. I was like, "Oh my god, this is super cool! I love this. I want to do this." Um, so as soon as then COVID hit. So as soon as COVID ended, like, okay, let's get into this conference game, starting speaking at conferences, teaching people, educating them about topics that I'm passionate about, with experiences I had, things I struggled with. And that has been kind of like the journey from a speaker perspective. And yeah, last year, I think that's one of the things I tweeted about. Last year, probably you were the person I saw most in conferences. I wonder why, but it's a real pleasure because in, there's something here to lay out for
Yeah.
discussion as well. But you were probably one of the first people that triggered my imposter syndrome
What?
on conferences, but also the person that changed my view the most on conferences itself. So there's a lot of stuff that we can speak about here.
Okay. Okay. That's incredible. Okay. I'm at a loss for words because the whole point of this podcast is to eliminate imposter syndrome. We say it in every single intro.
Yeah,
So
so there's a lot of stuff to talk here.
yeah. I absolutely love that. I triggered it, and I hope I triggered it in a good way, and you know, and I
You
hope it doesn't
definitely.
exist anymore. In fact, if it does exist, that's the first order of business on this podcast. We talk about where your imposter syndrome is and fix it.
Oh yeah.
You mentioned so many things, and I think that's so cool. One thing that really stood out to me was you said, as you were talking about yourself, I'm a developer advocate, I'm an author, I'm a speaker. You said I'd like to, or you said, you know, the book was a personal challenge of mine instead of this is what I do. And I think that's a really cool distinction. Like the connection between I like this and so I do this, because I talk to a number of people, as you can imagine, and some folks literally go like, yeah, I do this, I don't like it, it's a way to pay the bills. And you seem to be, and there's nothing wrong with that, but you seem to be the kind of person who absolutely likes all the things you're doing and doing all the things you like. So I think that's
Yeah.
highly respectable.
The way I see it is everything that I do in my career, in my job, whatever, they all contribute for me growing at some step, and that's kind of how I approach these early years of my career. I'd say I've been doing working professionally, so for how old am I? Okay, for around 6 7 years at this point. And I started coding way before that, but what I said when I started doing this was, okay, the first 10 to 15 years of my career, it's going to be all about maximum growth for me.
Mm.
And this means that every opportunity that I take, everything that I do is like, okay, I do it as a way to grow myself the most I can, so that when I get to an older phase in my life, I can be a bit more stable. I don't know if it makes a lot of sense, but
No, it
that's
does.
one of the things that I thought of. Like, okay, I don't want to have kids so early. I want to have them in my mid 30s, something in my 30s. So I want to get stability before I get there. But in order for me to get stability, I want to grow as much as I can before as well. So
Yeah.
everything that happens to me in my career, everything, it's a growth opportunity. And this kind of motivates me in itself, because I'm not looking at stuff like, oh, here's another stuff that I have to do, or here's something that I dislike. Well, we all have bad days as well, but the way I see everything is, okay, I'm using this as a chance for me to grow myself right now, and as an opportunity to earn new stuff, get new knowledge, meet new people, get new
Yeah.
friends. So that's kind of where I stand with stuff.
This is so cool. It just occurred to me that I have 10 years more experience than you in this stuff. Absolutely nuts. I feel old now. But no, I agree with you entirely. I will say this, as you know, somebody older, I do I'm with you in that I see everything as an opportunity to better myself, but I feel like that's a drug. And I am addicted at this point to better. Dude, the whole reason I have this podcast is because honestly, it keeps me accountable to learn. I'm working on this episode on linear algebra and Markov chains, and it's
Whoa.
the
Okay.
deepest dive I've ever done on anything in my life, and it's fun. And now now so yeah, it's a drug. I do want to have children. I empathize with everything you said, but I feel like there's at some point it just becomes like, whoa, I really love learning, and I want to keep doing it forever. So highly relatable. Can we actually pull on that thread a little bit, and talk about this, tying it back to the work you've been doing recently? Because I had the privilege of watching you at React Paris last year. Great conference. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, React Brussels. Thanks. Yeah, I'm already thinking about
You're
2 weeks
thinking the
from
next
now.
week already.
Yeah, yeah. Which, depending on when this airs, it'll be long over. But
Yeah.
I saw you at React Brussels, excuse me, and you did this really awesome talk. And then I saw you at React Alicante, and you did the same really awesome talk, right? Which is eliminating imposter syndrome by taking complex technical topics, server components, hydration, fine-grained reactivity, resumability, and turning them into comic book stories. So Batman and I love that you did the choose your own adventure thing.
Hmm.
Now, it's no surprise to me that you're a huge comic book fan. I was going to say nerd, but I thought I'll be kind of a
Oh,
fan.
I'm a comic book nerd. You can definitely see for everything
Yeah,
in the back.
judging just by your background. For those listening on audio, his background, he's got like a million. I'm not even joking. This is a million bobbleheads, and there's a baby Yoda, and there's all kinds of things. So, okay, you're this kind of person, and I think there's, and I don't say that with any judgment. I just want to be clear, but I think that's really cool, and I think in tech there's a bunch of people like that who like comic books. Who like I'm one of them. I love comic books and Marvel specifically. The DC properties have always been hit or miss, except the comics. I will say the comics are good, but every other media discussion for another time.
Yep.
However, you are familiar with these two worlds, engineering, comic books. And what you're doing with this talk, I appreciate significantly because you're reconciling these worlds. You're using metaphors that people are familiar with to teach things that people may not be familiar with, things like hydration, fine-grained reactivity, et cetera, et cetera. Can we maybe talk about that a little bit? Because I have to assume that the intention here is to eliminate imposter syndrome. It's like, hey,
Yep.
look, you're not an imposter with your hobbies, that is comic books, but you feel like an imposter with hydration. So let's
Hmm.
use the thing you're confident in to teach you the thing that you're maybe not so confident in.
Yep.
And I love that. Yeah, maybe we can talk about how all that came to be. For example, how did you identify comics as being this thing that people may be familiar with? These topics, hydration, server components, fine grained reactivity, being topics that people may not be familiar with. And then how did you reconcile them?
Yeah, so this talk has been, I like to say, my own journey with imposter syndrome and eliminating it for myself. First of all, that was kind of how it started. Because if there's a topic on this talk, it's because there was a point in my life where I was like, what is this topic? Everyone is talking about this, and I'm just here sitting at the conference, a meetup, like, okay. And I'm taking notes of like, okay, research this part, because there are these topics. So let's start with hydration, for instance. People give you a definition of hydration. You're like, oh yeah, there's the attaching the event handlers and recreating bringing the activity to something that was
Can
SSR. I
we
was like,
can we when we talk about topics like this, hydration,
mhm,
etc., and we will, can we define them like in one sentence and then
yeah,
continue? Because let's have people
okay, cool.
understand them and then go from there.
Okay, so when we talk topics like hydration, where we are basically attaching event handlers and bringing interactivity to a page that was server-side rendered, um, this was the definition I was always hearing everyone giving, and I was like,
Yeah,
okay, but there's when I hear these things, my brain immediately triggers the question, but how?
yeah,
How does it do that? And there's something in me that if I don't understand how stuff works, there's this anxiety and there's this imposter syndrome already that triggers. And I was like, okay, I have this definition, but I still don't understand how these things work. And I'm just sitting there and I was like, okay, I kind of understand it, but at the same time I don't understand it, and I don't like to have shallow definitions. Or this is, might not be shallow for some people, but for me, if I don't look into how stuff works, it
Yeah.
kind of triggers my imposter syndrome. And almost with imposter syndrome, and something that comes around with me a lot is, okay, I feel like an imposter, I don't belong here, all these things, yada yada yada, which we can talk a bit more after. But with this talk, basically, okay, there were topics, and I said, okay, I want to get something that first of all gives me an excuse to deconstruct topics that I've struggled with, and teach them to other people, because I was seeing that I was not the only person. I was seeing people like, oh, okay, but fine grained reactivity, that's cool, but for a non-native English speaker, they might get a bit confused with these topics, like, and I struggled with these things. So I said, okay, let's pick up on a concept. I want to deconstruct these things to the absolute mental model that it is. And I want people, first of all, to understand the mental model, which is, so the mental models are the way that our brain visualize concepts. So, for instance, when I see the word sleep, you'll know pretty much all the steps that are involved for you to sleep, because you have the mental model of that process formed for you. So I said, okay, I want, first of all, people to understand the mental models of these concepts, and then we can get more technical. So I thought, how am I going to do this? And basically, I drafted two abstracts for this talk. There was a version where it was like explain me like I'm 5, and there was a version with comic books. And luckily, the one that was started getting picked to conferences was the one with the comic books. The explain me like I was
Nice.
5 was never picked, so I just dropped it completely. And I said, okay, I'm a comic book nerd. I'm gonna get the characters, the stories that I really love about comics and everything. And I said, okay, now comes the art part. I like and this was, you were the first person that said this, to me on not on stage, but after a talk, and it really resonated with me, because I kind of like that part in my career going on a conference speaker, which is, you said, oh, Daniel is an entertainer, and this is actually something that I strive to be, because I like, besides giving knowledge to people, I like to entertain them. I don't like
Mm.
having those talks where I'm just sitting, okay. It's cool to have technical knowledge sometimes, but if you entertain them, people will have something to differentiate you from the other speakers or from the other talks. And that's also one of the things that I also saw in you when I saw you speak for the first time. Like, I think the first question when we met in person, one of the first things I asked you were, "Oh, were you that dude in SvelteConf that was emceeing, and every time someone drank water, you had people clap?" And I was like, that was
Yeah.
one of the first thing I asked you, and you're like, "Oh yeah, that was definitely me." And I was like, that's cool, because that's an entertaining thing, and that's kind of the person that I strive to be on stage as well. So I said, okay, let's grab the two things. Let's grab the mental models that I have deconstructed already. So I did a huge list, and then I asked some of my friends to go over it. In this case, Mateus Albuquerque, Why the Combinator on Twitter, and Attila Facina, which already did an episode on this podcast as well. And they went over it and said, okay, this is the basic mental model. So now let's see, how do I turn this into comic book stories? And here comes the entertaining part, or the challenging part to me, because I could have went one way. I could have done one story, and that's what people would see. But then I said, okay, what's the one thing that I haven't seen a lot of people do on stage that's super challenging to me and will make me grow as a speaker, but might also give a lot of work? And I said, okay, let's do different stories, one for Marvel, one for DC, and then let's have the audience choose. Which is super, in the beginning, was super scary for me, because it meant I had to do like double work every time I was practicing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was like, it gives something completely new to the audience. They're like, okay, now they can vote on which story they want to see, and at the same time, this extends the lifetime of the presentation of the talk itself, because now I have something that I can present. So for now, I think I did like this talk already 5 times, and there have been scenarios, some stories that the audience never seen yet. So there's the thing, like, even for hydration, I do a story, one with Iron Man and one with Lex Luthor. So Marvel for Iron Man and Lex Luthor for DC Comics, and the stories are, in the essence, are very similar, because the mental model has to be there, but they are different, because I'm a comic book nerd, so I'm gonna put the character's mindset into that thing. So I'm writing a story from the character perspective. So obviously, Tony Stark is going to be this bit more smug person at Will, super nice. There's gotta be the friendly vibe to it. While Lex Luthor is going to be more rude, is also a bit smug. There's all these things that I'm putting nuances in because I'm writing this for people that know comic books, but also for people that don't know them. The
Yeah.
the best part here is like I don't know if I ever did this version of the fine grain reactivity. So fine grain reactivity, I have the Watchers for Marvel and Batman with the Mobius chair for DC Comics. I don't think I've ever delivered the Mobius the Marvel version, which is the Watchers, because there's Easter eggs in when I do these things. There's a part where I'm telling a story and they're like, oh, and suddenly the Silver Surfer appeared, and you see like in the keynote Silver Surfer going by. And this is an Easter egg because if people are familiar with comics, they see Silver Surfer coming, they know, oh, there's Galactus on the corner. And the next slide, boom, Galactus show up. So I have these things there that I'm writing this story like, okay, how can I do this if someone that doesn't know comic books enjoys it, but people that know comic books are gonna be like, oh, it's that thing, oh, it's that meme, it's the meme from, or it's the character, the thing that I love. So there's basically I put my art out for this presentation, and it's kind of one of my favorites at the point. But it's
Yeah.
also one where I know that okay, everything that I do after this one, it's going to be on the shadow of that one for me. So
Mhm.
I'm having a ton of imposter syndrome now already with that because I'm like, okay, how do I do the next thing that kind of follows this talk?
Yeah.
Because conferences are not going to pick the same talk every time. So my idea with this was to keep extending the life and adding new topics. So now I'm working on adding a server components a topic for CityJS London. So I'm still working on it. I've started, but I haven't brainstormed stuff. But at the same time, I'm thinking already, okay, yeah, I'm delivering this talk in CityJS, I'm delivering this talk in Confront JS as well. But what's next? Because conferences that already picked this talk probably won't want to pick it again, even if I keep adding topics, because they might know that, but the audience might not know that. So some
Mm.
audience might like, okay, I already watched this talk last year, I want to go back to it again. Even if they are familiar with the nuances of how the presentation works. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
imposter syndrome being generated from that part as well.
Yeah.
But I also feel like this talk was kind of therapeutical. Sometimes my
Yeah.
brain translating service fails a bit, but it was kind of like therapy to build this talk because I was going over imposter syndrome that I had with these topics. I was able to go deep. For instance, for hydration, I was reading React source code on how React does hydration, and that's when it clicked. I was like, oh, so this is actually what happens. And I was like, okay, now it makes sense to me because now I can piece the how to this general definition that people gave me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's kind of it for this presentation right now.
Yeah. Okay. I have an idea for what you can pitch next to conferences.
Hmm.
Because since this talk was so well received, I feel like a lot of people would be interested in learning how they can do that. In fact, that's what we're teaching them here on the
Hmm.
podcast is like, okay, how can you do an effective talk that reconciles, things that you're confident in, so comic books, with things that you're not so confident in, and basically take this podcast episode, turn it
Yep.
into a talk. I think that might help
Okay.
you. There's so many interesting things you said that I want to pick on a little bit more there and capture the detail and nuance. For example, you talked about using the Watchers from Marvel to teach fine-grained reactivity.
Hmm.
Look, I'm a Marvel nerd, but I don't think I can compete with you on this. I'm a like level one like basic Marvel nerd. The cinematic universe cool. Some of the comic books cool.
Hmm.
For example, I know enough to know that like the gosh I like the origin of the symbiotes is this like god thing that
Hmm.
was maybe in Thor
No,
4. The name was what?
it's Null,
Yeah,
Knoll. So it's the god of the sea.
right. Right, exactly, and there's like rumors that this was the origin of Gore the God Butcher's sword or something like that.
Yep.
Whatever. So I'm there. Okay, you're probably on another level. I'm curious if we could talk about Watchers and fine-grained reactivity. I will tell you what I know based on Watchers,
Hmm.
and then you can tell me how this fits into fine-grained reactivity. But before we do that, can you maybe define fine-grained
Oh
reactivity
yeah.
for us?
So there's the way I can define fine grain reactivity is when you do something in your UI, only the part that it supposed to be updated updates. But this is powered by something, which are signals, effects, and derived signals, something that's scenario. So this is something that became very popular, or I would say that the expression itself was kind of. I'm pretty sure. I think I might go on a whim, but I think Ryan Carniato coined the expression itself. It was something that was already existing before with Knockout, but with Solid Jazz became kind of more popular again, and now it's everywhere. I would say you can't go anywhere in a conference or an event where you don't talk about signals. But yeah, fine grained reactivity is basically when you grab signals, effects, there are signals, and you have this relationship with the UI where only parts that you touch or are supposed to update versus updating everything by itself.
Okay.
I think that
And
is the best I can define right now.
perfect. Yeah, no, and that's good because now we'll understand it more
Mm-hmm.
using Watchers from Marvel as an analogy. So yes, so when you make an update to your UI, then
Mm-hmm.
only the part that changed in the user interface changes. Nothing
Exactly.
around it changes. Your components, your functions aren't rerun like in the case of React. It's just the value is changed in place by
Exactly.
something. That something is probably like a global array of publishers and subscribers is my guess, and we can talk
Mm-hmm.
more about the details there. Cool. Now let's bring Watchers into the mix, and this is where I'm confused with this
Okay.
analogy because Watchers in the Marvel universe, as far as I know, are like Uatu, for example, the king
Mm-hmm.
of the Watchers, is only allowed to watch and not interfere,
Okay.
and
So let's
and
start
so
with
this the signal driver in the runtime,
Mm-hmm.
this global array of pub sub publishers and subscribers. I mean, they have to change things in the UI. So the rule of the watchers is you cannot intervene, but in signals something intervenes. So
Yep.
I'd love to reconcile that here.
Yep. So that's the fun thing when I started talking about this discussing, because when I had this concept of signals, effects, and everything on my mind, I was like, Watchers fit this. And basically my story is literally focused about Watu. And fact, this story that I built, it's comic book canon because everything that happens on the story kind of ended up happening on the comics. Basically, how I end this presentation, this part of the presentation is literally showing a comic book strip and telling people you can go read the comic now. But speaking about Watchers and Watu, everyone
I just sorry to interrupt you, but you should be sponsored by Marvel and DC. I
yeah,
mean, you're literally showing them the comic and you're like, here, go buy this. Dude,
that
that's like
it
great
could
product
be.
placement.
But that's also one of the things that I was worried when I started. It's like I have a small disclaimer that this thing is not affiliated for anything, so that they don't take down the videos. Because I was like, I hope that no one issues a takedown on the conference videos or something like that. But coming back to the Watchers, everyone kind of knows that Watchers have this rule of you must always watch but never interfere. But also the thing that comic book nerds know is that Watu is always interfering every single time. So even though he has this rule, he's always breaking it. And that's kind of what happened the first time this showed up, because there was the first time he showed up was in an issue from the Fantastic Four in the 60s, something like that.
Hmm.
And what he ended up doing was there was this villain called Galactus, and Galactus was invading Earth because he's a planet eater. And what Watu did was he led the Fantastic Four to the ultimate nullifier, which is the thing that luckily can defeat Galactus. And this is basically the plot for the story. So I said, okay, there's this concept around observability, the observer pattern. So there's signals, and let's break the stuff up. Okay, so signals are something that is always watching, but then you can run effects to update something, to change something. Then you might also have something which are derived signals, can be memoized, because okay, memoization is a bit expensive. You don't want to, or only stuff changes when so with memoization, only when that stuff changes that the function is recreated. So you memorize functions to make sure that they are not usually memorize functions that are more expensive, so they are not recreated and not causing a performance burden. So I said, okay, how do I draw the parallels here? And that's kind of what I did. Okay, so let's set up the problem first. The problem is that the watchers might never interfere, but Watu got so used to looking at the Earth 636, so to this part of the multiverse, he got so used to looking at this, so he became sentimental with it. So when he saw a timeline where that part was going to be destroyed, he ran an effect. So he was watching everything. It's a signal, so he's watching everything. But every time something happened that basically triggered something that shouldn't happen for him, he runs an effect to step in and change that thing in itself. So this thing, when that thing changes, this is going to branch out. So yeah, now I know that I'm doing NGS, so people that are not watching might be struggling a bit, but there's this concept, there's this thing that when you change it, this is going to branch out. So there's going to be new timelines generating from that part. So these new timelines are expensive to see. So then I was like, okay, expensive to see. So these are going to be the things that are going to be the memos. They're going to be derived signals. So I started branching these parallels. And I think for the people that are seeing, like, I have this huge notebook where I have all the
Oh my
stories. I write
god.
them everything by hand first, and I do the mind maps on how topics connect. I think it's here somewhere. Yeah, I think yeah. So
Wow.
this one says Lex Luthor. This was one of the stories that I was writing for Resumability. But I started branching out. I was like, okay, I have the connections now. Now that I have the connections, let's start writing the story. And this is where the creative part happened, because basically I wrote a comic book story at the same time. So like, okay, there's this comic book story, and then as I was writing it, I was like, okay, what's gonna be the setup? So how do I close this? And then I started thinking, okay, this actually parallels what happened in the Fantastic Four in the 60s. So let's transition the story to that way. And I kept pointing the story, so ended up being like this thing where I'm feeding all the topics and all the small bits together, and they connect. So
Right.
that's kind of once you have the initial mental model and all the topics, you start thinking, okay, what's the problem? What are the characters? What do I want the audience to learn? And that's kind of what I do. So I tell the story, and after I tell the story, I do the technical introduction to the topic. And now that once that we have both, let's piece them together. And now that we have
Yeah.
everything together, we can see, okay, oh, so this is what he was telling us in that slide. So also,
Yeah.
basically, when Watu intervened the first time, he was running an effect, and this effect triggered the signal to change. And because this signal changed, the memos that were basically wrapping this signal changed as well. So and these things are expensive. That's why they try to avoid changing them as often. That's why they
Got
are
it.
wrapped in these extra steps. So everything started to connect, and that's kind of from a storyteller perspective, it became amazing.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I'm having so much fun doing this that it doesn't feel like work, and at the same time, as a
Yeah.
presenter, it's easier for me because now that I have the story written in my mind when I'm delivering it, okay, I'm not reading, but I'm reading the dialogues, and I can go on stage like, okay, I'm gonna tell you a story. This is what
Yeah.
happened, and as this, and then I just go crazy, basically.
That's so cool. It's I think also that's a great analogy for AI and AGI, right? Where Watu is this autonomous
Mm-hmm.
agent that observes the environment and then autonomously decides to run effects. I think that's the interesting part is the effects are defined in user space in the
Mm-hmm.
UI application. Like I write the effect, but Watu runs it.
Exactly.
And I wonder what the parallel is there. But I think that's really cool. Thank you for explaining that to me.
Yeah,
I
thank
get
you.
it now. I get that the rule of never intervene is a rule that in the comics at least is made to be broken. That was
Yeah,
my missing link.
that's how the Civil
I
War
want to
started in the comics. So sorry, I was going
well
on a parallel already.
no, that's good. The parallels are great. So I appreciate the context. I appreciate you talking about your process, dude. I think as an aside, as an editorial, you should sell that book at some point, auction it off for 1 billion bitcoins because it contains like your brain matter, if you want, or you can keep it as a relic. I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life, but I would, if that was for sale, I would definitely bid high
Oh,
for
that's
that
amazing.
book.
Thank you.
You mentioned your process in preparing this conversation, and not just this talk, but in all your talks. I have to assume when you're trying to eliminate imposter syndrome in people and really help them learn, is, and I'm just extrapolating here from your process with this talk, is you identified questions you had. So you're like, I hear these words, I don't get them, I want to get them. So that's your starting point. You're like your data, your sample data comes from not what is in the zeitgeist, not what's all around, or actually maybe the precursor is what's all around, but is your response to what's all around. Like
Exactly.
I don't get this thing, and because I don't get this thing, I think others don't get this thing, and this is my seed. And so then you plant that seed and you start exploring. And in terms of finding comic book stories, you take what you don't know or what you're maybe not fully confident on, and you connect them to things you do know. I think that's a really cool practice and protocol that people can take and apply in their everyday life. I think that's really. If I relate it to my experience, it's very similar. I hear things that I don't understand with enough quality, with enough fidelity. The resolution is 360p. It's not 4K, and I need to make it 4K. Awesome. I just want to stop and appreciate you for sharing that. And I think a lot of people can learn from that. You
Thank
mentioned creating this. Well, let's talk about speaking at conferences to do this, because that's what I know you. That's what a lot of us know you from. You mentioned you sent multiple variants of this CFP to conferences. One as the comic book one, and what was the other one?
Explaining like I'm 5.
Yeah, Life 5, exactly. And you said one got accepted over the other. This is sort of like A/B testing with
Yep.
conference talks. And I want to touch on this a little bit for listeners, because I have to assume there's a number of listeners here that want to speak at conferences but don't know the best way to go about submitting CFPs. And some people legitimately, I talk to so many people, some of them think that submitting more than one CFP is bad. Oh, am I gaming the system? Am I? And I often tell people, submit at least 3,
Yep.
right? And they can be 3 different talks entirely, or they could be, in your case, what you've done is 2 variants of the same talk with a few details changed. I'm curious if we could speak to all of this. For example, one, how do you even create a great CFP? I think the starting we've already identified, right? You identify things that you maybe don't know, you learn it, and then you present it. Shout out to James Q. Quick, friend of the channel, who has this community called Learn, Build, Teach, which I think lines
That's
up with that
amazing.
nicely. So you create the idea there, but then how do you pitch it? And so maybe we can talk about, 1, what a CFP is and where to find them, and 2, how do you choose the level of granularity, and 3, how do you choose the level of variance between variants? So am I just going to change like ELI 5 to comic books, or am I going to pitch like 3 separate talks, 3 separate tracks? For some people, they have a big variation of experience. For example, me, I pitch architecture talks on things like event sourcing, linear algebra talks on things like Markov chains, and front end talks on things like React, right? And so, do we pitch talks that are different across maybe even specializations? Do we just change a few details? Yeah, I'm curious if you could speak to all of that.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot to deconstruct here. Let me just start by saying something that not about or that people that are starting are not aware or they struggle with, which is, first of all, your talk, when you're submitting it to conferences, your talk not getting accepted doesn't define your value, and it's not a critic to yourself. That's something that when I was starting, I was like, oh, I'm submitting these CFPs, I'm submitting this stuff, and they are not getting picked. Maybe that means I suck. Maybe and this kind of made my imposter syndrome grow a bit more. One thing, as I've been organizing conferences, so I'm part of the program committee for React Summit US, C3 Festival as well, and now I'm
Does
helping.
that
Sorry?
does that mean if somebody wants to speak at these conferences, they just have to send you some money?
Unfortunately, not just fortunately, no, because there's a committee that goes over all the talks. And when you're going over all the talks, first of all, it's based on the opinion of a group of people. Most of the times, it's unbiased, so it's anonymous. You don't know who you are reviewing, and most of the times you're comparing topics as well. So, for instance, I remember last year in React Summit we got like 30 or 40 submissions of React server components. We're not going to pick everything. We can only pick like 1 or 2. So that meant that all the other ones had to be rejected. This doesn't mean that you suck as a person or that your content that you submit is bad. It just means that there was trade-offs that had to be made. And I think that not a lot of people understand this or take this into mind. And it's something that I came to learn as I started organizing this stuff. For instance, last year I spoke at almost 30 conferences, and I had a 76 percent rejection rate.
Wow.
So this year already, we're in March right now as we are recording this. I've had like 20 talks already rejected, submissions already rejected. So it's a numbers game, it's a trade-offs, and it's a perspective. So this is just something I want to leave clear so that people that are watching think a bit more. Now coming back to the abstract part, which is the main question that you asked. There's a lot of ways that you can, or that at least I go into it. So once we set up the problem, I know what I want to do. Or at least I know what do I need to do. Because one of the things that I did a couple of times, which I don't recommend to a lot of people, because it generates a lot of anxieties. Okay, I have the topic. It's something that I'm not fully proficient with, but it's something that I feel like once I am, I'll do a great job with it. So what I did was, okay, it's no problem. I learned enough to write an abstract. So I learned all the basics. I learned all the topics. So for instance, I did this with when I was doing a remix talk a couple of years ago. When remix came out, I didn't know remix, so I said, okay, I want to do a talk on remix because this is something that was coming out. So I learned enough. I learned the basics, and I said, okay, now that I have these basics, so nested routing, loaders, actions. Once I have these basics, now let's get creative. So I said, okay, let's. The main point of the abstract, it's to sell your talk, and it's to sell your talk to the audience, but first it's to sell your talk to the program committee. So you have to write something that's engaging, because there's a lot of stuff, and that's something that happened a lot right now. There's a lot of stuff, people just saying, okay, I have these ideas. Now they go to ChatGPT and say, generate me a text with this. And this happens more than I'd
Wow.
like right now. I've seen a lot of submissions that you are reading that and you don't know if that was written by an actual human or by ChatGPT, because there are
Wow.
things there that kind of trigger me a bit. But okay, we have these basics.
Can we sorry to interrupt, and I don't want to continue you on that train of thought, but
Mhm.
what are some of those things that bother you? What are, this is so
Yeah, we
people
can
submitting
definitely go over
abstracts from
that.
ChatGPT.
So
Yeah.
it bothers me because this is a topic that at least you want to. My goal when I'm talking about the conferences and speaking at conferences, I want to teach people. And so I'm gonna put my heart out preparing this stuff. And seeing someone that goes over these topics and like, okay, just prompt as AI and then generates something, that's the first thing that triggers me, because there's an emotional association to these things, at least for me. Every talk that I built, or the abstracts that I built, having them being good or not. Last year I wrote 10 abstracts. I delivered 8 of them in talks. 2 of them were never picked, but there's an emotional connection with the stuff that you write. So first of all, seeing this detachment from some people kind of
Mm.
makes me mad. But I know that this is a biased response. That's something that I comes from me. Not a lot of people look at these things at the same way. So that's the first.
Right, and it's because it's self-serving. It's like I
Exactly.
don't care about you. I don't want to teach you anything. I just want to be on a stage
Exactly.
and get my name out. Okay, okay, I
Okay,
see that.
that's
Yeah,
the first part, and the second one is, and this is kind of something that happens with AI right now, for content creation, because now there's a lot of like, and it's not even just fast food as you describe it. This is below fast food, because there are a lot of content being generated by AI right now. I've seen some content like, oh, React versus Redux. Like, for people that know these things, like, okay, you're like, why would you compare them both?
yeah,
What's the point? And then you see like a huge table in the corner, like, why? This is engagement bait? This is spreading misinformation. This is spreading stuff that we don't want the community to look at the same way, because they are not competing. They are things that are there to help each other. But
yeah.
I've seen this happen in abstracts, and so there have been abstracts like, oh, we're gonna go over this, we're gonna go over this, and you start reading those things and like, okay, this feels like it was generated by AI, because people have nuance. When you're writing an abstract, there's some storytelling in you, or that at least most people have, that they embellish stuff. AI
Yeah.
doesn't feel like it has. It's more. I feel like an AI is more straight to the point, so they give you more details. Obviously, you can try to prompt it to add some flair to those things at least, but most people don't. So they're like, oh, we're gonna go present this and this, we're gonna do this and gonna do that, we're gonna do that, and you're gonna learn this. Okay, this is the model that you apply in abstracts, obviously, but with the content generated by AI, sometimes there's this rawness to the rawness. That's the word, I
Mm-hmm.
think. So there's this rawness to the text that you're reading that doesn't feel like it was an actual human. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
This is an intuition thing, but that's also why there's a program community, because sometimes I'm like, oh, this feels like it was generated by AI. Some people are like, oh yeah, it also felt like that to me, but I didn't know what to mention. So there are these factors, and then the emotional trigger behind how you how I look at this kind of, that's why I say it triggers me, because you're focusing on just putting something there, so it might get picked, and then you build the talk. So that's kind of how I see people
Okay.
that do this part, at least right now, which shouldn't be like that. For me, conferences are a way of learning and about caring about the community, not being on the biggest stage of all sharing
Yeah.
stuff. Obviously, we all have egos. That thing feels good, but that shouldn't be your
Yeah.
main reason to go to speak at conferences and events. It should be to focus on the people that are in front of you, having an experience with them, and having them leave your session with, okay, I learned something. I feel like I grew as a human, as a developer, as a person, whatever. So that's kind of my my way of
That's
looking into
yeah.
that.
That's so beautiful, and that's I think you and I have very strong overlap in values here, and that's why we're friends because I share exactly everything you said. And if there's anyone who disagrees with that, I'd absolutely love to have you as a guest on the podcast, and we could talk more about no, it's actually better to just be on stage and get lots of influence because then you get book deals and money and whatever. But I've been close to like the top of all of those things
Mm-hmm.
on some degree, and I was like, this is super empty without the human connection.
Yep.
So I would love to have that discussion in any case. Okay, thank you for that big rabbit hole. But let's go back now to talking about, so you're on the committee, you're reviewing CFPs, you see some are AI generated and you don't like that for some reasons, but
Mm-hmm.
how then do you deal with multiple variants of the CFPs? By the way, one takeaway that I got that I want to make clear here for listeners is when you submit CFPs, if you're submitting a CFP in a highly trending, highly quote unquote competitive space. So, for example, if everyone in the zeitgeist is talking about server components or edge computing or AI, and you submit an AI talk, you are going to be a drop in the ocean. There's
Yep.
going to be like 300 different submissions, and you're more likely to get rejected because everyone's talking about this thing. And it's just more, I don't like to use the word, but it's more competitive. So
Exactly.
maybe a takeaway is to pick a topic that no one else is talking about, but you think is super valuable and people should be talking about.
Or
Something like picking your right weekly rate as a contractor as opposed to an hourly one, for example. I'm curious, Daniel, if you have more to add there.
yeah, and to add to that, like sometimes you can even add a flair to it. So, for instance, I don't remember what was the talk itself, but I've seen, okay, there's a lot of accessibility talks, but for instance, accessibility with forms. So you can add flair to those things. That's stuff that, okay, we all have seen the version of talk, but we have never seen this talk focusing on this specific part. So that kind of helps differentiate stuff a bit because, okay, introductions. So, for instance, introduction to server components, introduction to server components. Obviously, that's not the title, but as you're reading, you're like, okay, this is an
Yeah.
introduction to server components, an introduction to server components. Oh, this is a case study on how this person migrated a code base with over 1,000 lines to server components. Oh, okay, so let's keep this one to discuss a bit more after. So there's flares to how you put stuff that
Right.
helps differentiate it. So
And by flares, I'm hearing the word flare, but what I'm like, there's a reverse proxy in my mind
Mhm.
translating what you're saying, and the word that keeps coming up here is granularity. So like if you keep saying my talk is about server components, my
Mhm.
talk is about server components, then the program committee reads this and like, yeah, cool, you and like 50 other people are talking about the same thing, and this is not to be dishonoring to the people who submitted the talk. It's more the program committee is tired because you're reading. And I'm
Yep.
also on the program committee of conferences like JSCon Budapest. The amount of like broad AI talks, unparalleled, like
Yep.
there were hundreds of proposals, and most of them were like LangChain this, LangChain that, LangChain, and I was like, okay, this is all the same. And and when you talk about flares, I hear granularity because if somebody said if a talk abstract and proposal went from an introduction to server components, like you said, to something along the lines of how to migrate to server, as exactly as you
Mhm.
said, or the trade-offs with server components, or when to not server components, or like, and look at us here, just like generating random conference talks that are likely to get
That could
accepted,
be.
But yeah, flair, granularity. I hear and agree with that. I think that's another takeaway for people listening is like it maybe if you're getting rejected a lot, if your rejection rate is too high, it's definitely not because you suck, but it's maybe your content is too abstract.
Mhm.
And look, I get that it's called an abstract, but we still ideally prefer it to be a little bit concrete. Is that accurate?
It is, and something that I've actually going through right now, I think. So, for instance, to give an example, when I started the year, I like to end the year with thinking, okay, this is the talks that I had. These are the talks that I want to carry for next year. These are the ones I want to drop. Maybe I want to speak about this topic. And for instance, I was submitting So like I said, I have more than 20 rejections right now. And it made me think, okay, what's happening for this talk to be rejected so often? And that's also something that you should do as a speaker. When you're submitting and you don't see a talk getting picked, you have to stop for a bit and think, okay, yeah, maybe this topic is a niche itself. So it's something that, okay, you might like, some people might like, but it's not something that's going to give value to everyone. For instance,
Yeah.
this nerdy guy talk that we were just discussing, this talk is a niche by itself. At least
Yeah.
that's the vision that now I have. It's not something that, if I'm pitching this to conferences, not a lot of them are going to be like, oh yeah, this is something that I need. Like last year, before, I think the first conference that ever picked this talk was React Brussels. They were the first conference that picked it, and this was only in August when they sent the acceptance, I think. So I had been applying with this talk since December from last year, and it took until August to someone to pick it. And because this talk was so successful, it kind of, how do you say, shortened my view on the perspective of this talk. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. Everyone's going to love it because I love it a ton. But I was like, okay. And then I started applying this to a bunch of other conferences, and then I start seeing the rejections come. And then I was actually chatting with Attila and with Alien from Astro, Alien Codes on X, and they're like, oh yeah, but this talk is good, but it's kind of a niche. When you go to conferences, people want to take something that they can apply. Obviously, this is something that they can use, but conferences don't know that, and maybe the way that you're transcribing it in the abstract might not take it that better, because sometimes there's the limit on how you can set stuff to abstract. So basically what I did, I stopped. It was actually like my last Friday. I spent the entire afternoon and said, okay, let's look at the content that I have. Let's see, why is this not getting picked? And basically I turn off my brain on what I know, and this is something that I've getting better recently. Turn off my bias, look at the content that I wrote, and I'm like, okay, let's read at this as for someone that, okay, I'm reviewing this for a conference, I want an audience to learn from this, and let's look at my content. And then I start taking notes and criticizing myself, okay, maybe this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. And then you get this view, okay, maybe I can still apply this to some conferences, some might pick it, but I need new content. And basically, last Friday, I spent, and that's once again this notebook, like, for people that are seeing, so there's like 5, 6, 7 pages of new abstracts.
Wow.
So basically I started, okay, let's review what are the topics that I want to talk about, what are the things that I've struggled recently, what are the things that I've seen my coworkers struggle. So I started doing this mind map once again. Here's the raw topic, and then I started taking, okay, if I was going to talk about this raw topic, and this can apply to every abstract building, let's add the things that I would like to talk about this topic. Okay, and I start writing notes, and as I was writing, some of them were crossed because I was like, okay, this is niche. So for instance, I can tell you something that's niche that I dropped, which is things I wouldn't use AI for. And if anyone can make this talk work, please do. But I was writing this and I was like, okay, I'm gonna postpone this for now because this is kind of a niche thing and not a lot of people might pick. But at the same time, I don't think I'm qualified enough to give AI talks without feeling like I'm grifting people. I don't know if this makes sense, but I have knowledge, and when I was writing, I was like, okay, I don't feel like I have enough knowledge for this thing, so I'm gonna drop this. And it's kind of a niche, so let's focus on other stuff. So I went to the other topic. I had a topic, I reviewed my experiences, I reviewed what I knew, and I started taking, okay, this, that. And once you have all these topics, you can think, okay, what's the audience? Who are the people that I want to reach with this talk? Because that's important when you're applying to conferences. You're not going to submit a front end talk to a SQL conference, for instance.
Yeah.
That, well, you could, but it probably won't get picked. You can always submit, but it's gonna get rejected, and you're probably gonna take some other people's time reviewing it. So once you have the audience, you have the topics, then you can say, okay, let's write the abstract now. And when you're writing the abstract, then that's basically, at least my mindset with the abstract is convince people that they want to watch this. So there has to be some level of teasing, so some level of, so once again, I like to say the flair, but that might not be the word. But there has to be some distinguishing thing in this abstract that people are going to see, okay, this is not the the topic that this other person has. This is the flair. And okay, then you have the abstract. Once you have the abstract, some people would say you're ready to go.
Yeah.
But as a reviewing abstracts, one thing that I value a ton, and that not a lot of conferences do, but some do, and luckily the ones that have been part of the committees do, which is add extra details. So there's the title, the abstract, and the extra details. And sometimes the extra details make so much of a difference, because imagine, let's once again go back to the server components discussion. Okay, there's two talks that feel very tutorial on how server components are. One person on the extra details, it's empty, or some says, oh, I wrote a blog post about this. That might also be a bit triggering, because don't do that, by the way, for people that
Yeah.
do that. They can do, but I would say don't, because most of the times call for papers are the review is anonymized. So if you're adding something into extra details that is going to identify you, then that can also be excluded already. So you don't want program committee to be like, oh, I know this person is my friend. Oh, I want this person to come speak at this conference, at this conference that I'm helping. You don't want this thing to happen. So don't do that. But the extra details is basically the what's the word? The dark horse. That's something that comes to mind. The dark
The
horse.
flair. Flair is a great
That's
word
also
for
the
this.
flair, exactly. Because I've seen, and this is one thing that I do for every talk that I write. The extra details. I have the table of contents for my talk. When you provide the table of contents, even if your talk is not built, first of all, it shows the program committee that you already thought about it. You already know how you're going to structure. And it also helps you, because imagine that you submit a talk to a conference and it doesn't get picked until like 6 months after. And that talk has never been picked yet. So 6 months after, you come back to it and you're like, oh, what did I want to talk about this abstract? What the heck is this thing? What did I wrote now? And then you get to on that panic. Okay, now I have to make a talk about this topic, and I have no idea what I wanted to do here. If you have the table of contents already structured, it will help you, but it will help you stand out in a review process, because people will see that thing and like, oh, okay, this person thought about it. This is how this person is going to structure. And sometimes there are details where you go into that table of contents are like, oh, so this person wants to talk about this. And this is something that was not on the abstract, but it shows up here. So that can also be like a point in favor for some people. So that's kind of like the process and the things that I like to have now that I've learned from reviewing abstracts and talks, basically.
That's so cool. So you actually take all the knowledge you get from being on the program committee, and then when you have to submit talks, you're like on the program committee but for yourself.
Exactly.
And you value that's such a hack, is like, if you want to get accepted to speak at more conferences, then just join a program committee
Because you see how
and
other
learn
people
what it
think.
takes.
Exactly. So, and that's also
That
something that you could apply if you're in a program committee and then you're submitting a talk. How would this person review this talk? Because then you have their you know that basically it's the same thing as a developer persona for people that do DevRel. So you
yeah.
know the type of person that's on the program committee. That can also be something that some people can do. I wouldn't recommend it, but some program committees are public. So if you know some of the people, you can kind of hack the CFP abstract to that specific program committee. I never did it. I don't recommend you do it
Oh.
because it's a ton of work, and I would say it's not effort. It's not an effort, but it's something that you could do. Like if you know
Yeah.
the person, for instance, now you go into a program committee and you see that I'm there. Like, oh, I know that Daniel likes these things, these things, these things. This thing might pick up his attention. So you could definitely put something like that. Oh, comic book, or how Batman fixed this issue. And I'm like, oh, Batman, that thing is gonna, because I have biases, even though they are not queer, but that's also why there's a group.
Yeah.
There's gonna be biases there, so that could be like an ethical tip for submitting
Yeah.
calls, which I don't recommend, but people could do as well.
I could confess moments where I've been on a program committee, and I knew who the thing, it was anonymous, but I already knew who the abstract and proposal was, because I know my friends and I know how they write, you
Yep.
know. And I will say this: I like Attila and David K. Piano. Every single time I'm like, yes, approve this
This is
stuff.
the
Well,
person.
because it's I now I think there's nuance here, because these are my friends, but it's not just because they're my friends I'm going to accept their
You know the
talk. It's
knowledge
more,
that they have and what they
I
have
know
on
the
the table.
knowledge they have, I know their speaking ability, I know their intentions, but that's just them. I also know the conference on which I'm a program committee
Yep.
member. And I see the overlap. I'm like, look, I know who this is. I know this is against the anonymous spirit,
Mm-hmm.
but this is definitely going to land well for everybody here,
Yeah.
including the
I
attendees.
can
And
share
so,
similar story. So for instance, this year for React Summit, we're reviewing some talks, and that's one of the things that I do because I've been into a bunch of conferences as well, and then I start see repeated titles like, wait, I've seen this talk before. Oh, I know this person. And one thing that's important to know when basically anonymity, forgot sometimes my brain,
yeah,
the anonymous factor is gone for you. It's important that you flag it because I think like you can obviously tell. What I do is, okay, I know that, for instance, there was this talk I was reviewing. I'm like, oh, I know that this is from Mateus because Mateus Albuquerque, why the combinator, because he's the other person that I spent way more time. It was with you, with Mateus and Attila last year. I was always
yeah,
with all of you last year. So I saw that
yeah,
talk, like, I know this talk is from Mateus. So like, okay, I said, okay, I'm biased. This talk is submitted from a person that I know is a friend of mine. I'm gonna rate this talk a bit more higher than I would because this talk is not, the talk was not picked, just FYI, because that's why there's a program committee.
yeah,
But it's important that you flag it also because there's the anonymous factor to these things, obviously, and you don't want to have it biased. But once you know
yeah,
how a person is going to deliver that content and how the talk works, you know that the audience is going to take value from it. So there's
yeah,
the anonymity part, but there's also like, okay, how do you handle your own biases? And I think it's
yeah.
important that you flag it, obviously.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think it's important to flag it, but also it's important to consider the whole other list of proposals and the final and how your bias will affect the final
Exactly.
speaker list. And I say that because I wouldn't like if I look at the proposals and I notice, oh, there's really not a lot of beginners here. There's not a lot of, by beginners I don't mean like technical beginners. I mean
Mm-hmm.
beginners like first time speakers. There's not a lot of first time speakers. There's not a lot of opportunities being handed out to newcomers.
Yep.
There's not a lot of women. There's not a lot of people in color. There's not a lot of underrepresented groups. Then even though I absolutely love and adore my friend Attila, there's no way I'm approving him for
Yeah,
that,
makes
right?
sense.
So it's
There's the nuance, obviously. There's always a
and
nuance.
it and yeah, and so yeah, I think ideally the program committees are chosen by people who will do the right thing. And
Exactly.
sometimes the right thing is, oh, it's my friend, I'm going to accept him. And other times it's no,
Yeah,
there's
there
more here.
has to be always considerations. That's it. That's one important thing. For instance, one of the things that they do in React Summit, which is really good, like there's always this diversity check, this balance. So once we are approving, obviously there's the anonymous factor, but like, okay, now we want to make this more diverse. We want first time speakers. We want this diversity from. Obviously, this needs to be a diverse conference. So there's always this balance where, like, okay, we have approved a bunch of talks. Now let's stop for a bit and let's see
Yeah.
if it's diverse or it's just a bunch of white heterosexual men. That's obviously not something that you want in a conference. That's why
Yeah.
there's a diversity aspect to it. So that's something that you should always do and stop and think
Yeah.
on how you're doing stuff. So that's one of
Yeah.
the things I,
And for
I, I
those
really value.
Yeah, and for those listening, I think it's important I fully expect that because this is the internet, there's people listening and going, oh, but why does diversity even matter? My answer, and I want to hear if you agree. My answer is because, especially living in Germany, there was a time where non-diversity and homogeny was praised. This was called fascist Nazism, and people died. Literally, if you weren't white and blonde and Aryan, then you're subhuman, and we're going to kill all of you.
Yeah.
And that just led to further entrenchment in flawed ideology because there were no competing ideas. And so having a variety, literally a diversity of ideas that come from a diversity of people with diverse backgrounds and ethnicities and skin colors and sexual orientations and all of that is more encompassing of the planet, humanity. And when you have diversity, you can have diversity in ideas, you can have competing ideas, and you can have the best possible outcome. That's at least my take. I'm curious if you
No,
have a similar.
I completely agree with you. I think like there has been too many focus or too many years of, and I wouldn't say this as an historical reparation type of thing, but there have been too many opportunities given to the stereotypical white male person. So there's the biases that you have as a white male person, obviously. So there needs to be someone who will challenge those biases. There will be someone that will bring a different perspective that you have, and that's why there's a diversity check
Yeah.
into these things, because you want different opinions. You don't want all people that think alike, because if everyone in a group thinks alike, there's not going to be new challenges popping up. There's not going to be people challenging each other to grow, because everyone has the same mindset
Yeah.
itself and the same historical view of humanity itself, because the way and being your race, your sexuality, it's something that you're born with, it's something that you grow with, and it's something that affects who you are as a person. And that's
Yeah.
something I feel like some people don't get, because not everyone is subject to racism, not everyone is being discriminated by the sexuality, not everyone knows what it feels like to be in a body that they don't identify with the gender they were born. So there needs to be, these are all things that contribute to our personality and contribute to the way that you work as well and how you share stuff. So
Yeah.
that's why it's important to have these different ways of viewing and different ways of working in the world itself, not just in conferences, in meetups, in work, there,
Yeah.
in everywhere. So I think that's kind of my view in it as well.
Yeah, I was having a conversation once with somebody, and they said something so profound, and the topic was diversity and inclusion. And they said, a black woman in tech or not in tech wakes up in the morning, looks in the mirror, and sees a black woman.
Mm-hmm.
A woman wakes up in the morning, looks in the mirror, sees a woman. A white man wakes up in the morning, looks in the mirror, and sees a person. And I thought that is so profound. Like we walk around with these labels, but
Mm-hmm.
the majority has no labels. It's just, oh, I'm just a person.
Yep. These labels affect
And
your
I think
personality.
that was a moment where I was like, whoa. Anyway,
That's really
I
profound. I really like that.
yeah. I want to come back. I want to circle back to your process. And again, the point is to pull like actionable
Mm-hmm.
takeaways from this deep
Yeah,
dive
makes sense.
for people listening. I really appreciate that you every single time you started about picking what to talk about, you started from a place of this causes me some type of personal discomfort. I don't
Mm-hmm.
understand this well enough, etc. And I want to one, overcome my own personal discomfort and then teach it to others. And I just want to circle back to and appreciate that, because the counter to this is not starting with personal pain,
Mm-hmm.
but starting with what is trending and then being a thought leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to bring a concrete example here where you said, I want to do this talk on things I wouldn't use AI for. And you're like, wait a second, this is just me being
Surfing the trend, yeah.
right, quote unquote relevant, going with what's trendy. And you use this word, you're like, oh, but I didn't want to do it because I feel like I would be a grifter. I would be
Yep.
grifting. Wow. I want to pause and applaud you for that. I also want to ask you to elaborate on that,
Mm-hmm.
specifically the nuance between, starting from personal pain versus going with the trend and how we can avoid it.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot of ways you can approach these things. So, but starting with the pain aspect, versus the pain aspect, when you, at least the things that I value in a speaker. So let's start there. Things I value in a talk is if someone is passionate for it, and you're passionate for stuff that you suffered most of the times or things you overcome. That's some, because it comes from our personal experiences. If you struggled for a thing, and how many times it has happened to people, you're coding, you're stuck on something, and then suddenly something clicks and you fix it, and you're like, oh, I want to share this with everyone. Like, oh, I fixed this.
Yeah.
And that's that moment you're gonna have all this adrenaline, because there's the dopamine and whatever thing in your brain. You're like, oh, this chemical reaction that makes you happy because you fix it, and you want to share this with everyone. This is the type of things that I love to see on stage. When you see someone that's passionate about what they're talking about, it helps me, at least personally, understand stuff more, and it makes me enjoy the presentation. It's different if you're on stage and you're like, oh, this is these super things, versus someone, yeah, there's this thing that I learned, and so obviously
Yeah.
with nerves and everything, but when someone's passionate, you're gonna feel. And passionate sometimes comes from stuff you struggled with, stuff
Yeah.
you felt pain with, something that helps you. That's why most of my talks, outside from the ones that are topics that I wanted to learn and felt anxious, there were topics that stories, horror stories, or stuff that I suffered in work, or stuff that I've seen people, mistakes that I did, mistakes I've seen coworkers do. So it all comes from stuff that I ended up being passionate itself. Surfing the trend kind of makes you not be as passionate. You could be, depends on how good of a speaker you are.
Yeah.
Some people can deliver 1 hour talks about stuff that they're not passionate about. That's good. If you can do that, it's amazing. But most people, when they are starting, they don't know how to do this because
Yeah.
there's no preparation that you have for being on stage and like being in front of a bunch of an audience and sharing these topics. It's something that you're not prepared to. So pick your passion, because if you go into a topic, and I want to circle back onto something that I said at the beginning, and it I think
Yeah.
absolutely fits here. When we first met, it was in React India, 2022. And yeah, I was aware of you from your from that SvelteConf. I'd followed you on Twitter for a bunch of time, and I knew how good of a speaker you were already. I'm like, oh, I'm going to speak after this person, and this was like my first outside of Europe conference, and it was like my third or 14th person conference as well. So that was also a big thing for me. So there were two things that were making me super nervous on that conference. It was, first of all, I was going to speak about a React testing library with Ken Sidods on the room. And the second one was I was going to speak after Tejas Kumar, which everyone's like, oh, this dude is amazing. He's an amazing speaker. He's going to do, like, oh, man, how do I follow him? Because, and right before you went on stage, we were talking. I was like, dude, how am I going to follow up on you? And we were not, well, I wouldn't say we were friends. We were just acquaintances. We had just met each other then. And you're like, dude, do what I do. Don't care about that. You just go there and you have fun. And I was like, fun? And you're like, yeah, because if you have fun, even if the talk goes poorly, if the audience doesn't like, you're gonna leave the stage with something that was good for you, a good experience. It was something that you learned as a person. And that's something, I don't know if you know the impact that had in my life, but it's actually changed the way I viewed public speaking and doing talks, because every time
Wow.
I went on stage, it was like, oh, I want to share this topic with people. I hope they don't hate me. I hope they don't know I'm an imposter, or they don't pick it up on stage. And if something bad happened, I would be feeling bad for the rest of the week. I remember some of the one talk I delivered, it was so bad that I spent like the next 2 weeks just feeling bad about it. But
Wow.
after this thing, it kind of changed, because, fun fact, I think like React India 2022 is still one of the best presentations I did, because, first of all, I was inspired by you, and it was also after you, because you also did a very good job warming the crowd. That's something that it's also important when you have a good MC or a good speaker, is the crowd reaction to the speakers after. Because if you have a super good speaker that warms the crowd and makes the crowd being engaged, the person that's immediately after, it's still gonna surf that thing a bit. So and that's one of the things that I also felt happened, because you did such an amazing job that when I got there, I was like, okay, first of all, I'm gonna have as much fun as I can, and I
Good.
had this much fun as I could. That's why I still have so many fond memories of that conference itself and that talk itself, because, first of all, I was having so much fun, and second, it was because the crowd was already super good after. No, so this is obviously the the crowd is always good, but what I mean, the crowd was warmed up. They were receptive. So that's something. For instance, it's a
Yeah.
difference before when you're delivering a talk. You're the first person on the day. The way that you deliver a talk can warm the audience for other speakers. So if that's why usually you want to have a good keynote first, opening it, so that the person that has to follow can lead on to that impact and keep it going. So, but this is already like we're going into the stage presentation tips and tricks. But circling back, so why did I tell this story? Because, first of all, I don't know if I also told this to you already, or I had told you this, this, how much impact this story had on me. But I think that is important, because this is why I think it's important to pick stories and stuff that you relate emotionally, because
Yeah.
obviously you can have fun doing trending topics, you can have fun doing those things, but if you're talking about something that you don't personally enjoy, you're not gonna have so much fun. And
Yeah.
I've did talks on topics that I didn't enjoy back then, and in retrospective, if I go back to watch that, I'm like, oh yeah, this talk is not good, because I see myself that I'm not having fun. I was surfing the trend, so I was like, oh, I'm doing this because everyone wants to know about this topic. And if I go back, like, I watched this. First of all, I was not prepared for that talk, because, okay, I did the abstract, I researched a bit, I had the basic knowledge, which was more than a beginner/intermediate. That's kind of the level that I point to if I'm doing a beginner talk. Beginner, at the end of the beginner, in start of the intermediate level, something like, which is also something super difficult to measure, but we can talk about that after. But I was not having fun delivering that talk. Yeah, people felt they got something out of it, and it might have helped. That talk was picked a bunch of times, but for me, that's why I stopped doing it. I was not having the passion to do that stuff anymore. And that's kind of like the measure that I do for my talks right now. Every time I'm writing an abstract, it's like, okay, I'm doing this. Is this me surfing the trend? Or is this me being passionate about something? Because sometimes you can find a mid-level on some of the things. You can feel like, okay, I could be passionate because I can relate to having my imposter syndrome about this topic and my struggling to know this topic. But once you know the topic itself, how do you keep this passion going? So you can probably keep it the first 2-3 times you deliver a talk, but because there's also going to be the unfamiliarity level with it. But after a bit, the passion kind of starts to fade, and that's when I like to go into different topics.
Yeah.
I still feel like I didn't have anything actionable regarding the trending part.
That's okay. That's okay. We'll identify it together. So just have fun. I think that was actionable. Thank you for sharing that. By the way, I didn't realize it had such a big impact. Gosh, I sort of see now how it might have even influenced your comic book thing that we talked about, because you're like,
I would
comics
never
are
think
fun. I
about
want to
that
have fun.
before that, definitely.
That's absolutely wild. So in a way, I created that talk for you.
Thank you.
Anyway,
now
I'm just-
I owe you royalties on it or something like
yeah,
that.
no, I'm just so surprised. Because for me, I wasn't thinking at that level, man. I was literally just having fun. So it blows my mind to hear that. Wow, the impact has gone so far and wide. I think that is a takeaway. Definitely is when somebody's like thought leadering for influence. You just know that this isn't. I think we all sort of have the sixth sense of like something here isn't genuine.
Yeah.
There's just
It smells
and we
markety. It's kind of sometimes.
it smells markety. And I spend a lot of time outside of tech. My main hobby is biology and health and wellness, and to my best knowledge, nobody knows where that intuition comes from. Nobody knows. It's so cool. It's like these like primitive evolutionary circuits. The jury's out. Like there's a high debate in biology about pheromones and like olfaction without smell. But somehow we can smell BS. I don't know where it comes from. Nobody does. But if I was a billionaire, I would fund that research intensely because I think there's something there. Okay, you talk about just have fun. And I highly agree. In fact, that's my whole thing with this podcast. I don't even look at the analytics and listenership because frankly I don't care. I want to come and have fun with you and people like Jeff Escalante and Kent C. Dawes and Attila, and we'll get David Piano on the show. It's just about let's exchange thoughts and have fun while doing it, and hope that when people listen to it, they get some practical takeaways. And of course, there's guests, but there's also lectures. And dude, like my lecture, the episode on how computers work. I mean, we go from subatomic electrons all the way through how electricity works to this is just fun. This is me pulling on a rabbit hole. And I was listening to my own episode recently, and I could hear the passion. So you talk about passion. There's a moment.
Sometimes.
Yeah, there's a moment when I talk about how SSL encryption works. So when you send a request, an HTTPS request, how the browser encrypts this using the domain certificate and then hands it over to the TCP/IP stack, then the IP stack, then the packets make it from your computer to the data center to, through the ISP to the data center and to the other side. And your reverse proxy, so your Nginx or whatever, will like unwrap the TLS encryption and then give it to Node.js, the server. And all of that happens before some people can blink. Like I talk about this in the episode, and I'm just like, whoa.
You're
and
passionate about it right now already, so.
Right. And that, I think, it's hard to have unless you actually care. So my follow-up question to you was going to be, if you're not passionate about something, where do you find the passion? How do you find, or maybe not so much if you're not passionate about something, how do you like manufacture passion, but more, how do you even find the things you're passionate about? How did I find passion in understanding the whole computing journey, right? And so my thesis, my hypothesis, it's not actually proven, is you find the passion, you uncover the passion when you solve a problem, when you make a discovery. You make a discovery and you're like, whoa, I need to, and that's what gives passion. And so would you agree with that? And then we can maybe
I
follow that up with
definitely
another
agree.
question.
And sometimes it's passion that comes from small things, because once again, it comes from your personal experience when dealing with topics. So imagine that you're learning a new framework or something like that. That I think that this can be a good example. You're learning a new framework and you're like, okay, this is kind of feels like the same way that this other framework did this thing, but then there's like this small different thing that this framework does that the other didn't, which was something that you struggled with before, and you're like, this one makes it super easy, and that's where you find passion, because you find something that like, oh, this was something that I struggled with, and this is something that this thing made super easy, or this is something that I was doing a bunch of years ago, and now this framework brought back, and it was something that I really liked, or something that I struggled with, but now they made it easier. It's about playing to the human emotion as well. So I think that we are all emotional people in a sense. So there's this emotion aspect of, okay, let's pick up the this topic that people struggled with, or and make it simpler, because this is going to generate an emotional reaction from people, even if they don't know it. I think that's kind of what happens a bunch of times, because you're the once that click in your brain happens and like, oh, this thing was so much easier than doing this thing the other way. This is already how you find passion. You're finding passion because that's probably how you're going to sell this topic to others, to someone else. Like someone going to be like, okay, there's going to be this thing that this person suffered, and now they're sharing their suffering, or how they get rid of their suffering with me. And there can be small things. I would say you can also latch to these things when it's something that it doesn't start as passionate for you. I think that's something that I like to do, because then you can build a storyline around that thing. And if
Yeah.
you can build a story, you can make your talk a bit better sometimes, because that's also something that I super value, is people focusing on a story itself versus just explaining topics, which can happen as well. I've seen people just explaining topics that are super passionate, and it's amazing. But if there's a storyline sometimes around it, it makes it easier.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It sounds like pain and passion are inextricably linked,
mhm,
because passion comes from removing pain. That's so cool. I've never made that distinction so clearly before. And now that I see it like that, it seems like it explains a lot of passion, not just in tech or at conferences, but around the whole world. For example, I know a bunch of like religious people who are extremely passionate that their God is the way.
mhm.
And it's because in their story, and you talked about story, that God has removed certain pain. And
Yep,
they're like, no, no, I'm super passionate about this because like I was struggling and my life was a mess. And then I showed up and I changed my belief system and I changed my behavior. And and so I need to evangelize. That's
yep.
the basis of even evangelism. So it's like pain, then passion, then evangelism. And I love this so much because it also alludes to the fact that if there is no pain, then there is no life, there is no
Yep.
adaptation. You're sort of just coasting. And unfortunately, I do have I do know people who, they're born with a silver spoon in their mouth.
Mhm.
Daddy pays all the bills, and they've never had pain in their entire. They've had the most comfortable life ever, and these people are the most lost people I know. So absolutely nuts. You're totally blowing my mind with this. For those people who have no pain, who need pain to develop passion, but also to adapt and function through society. What would you? How would one? And I know you're not a sociologist, so I'll manage expectations here. But like, how can, maybe from your journey or from friends' journeys, how do you go towards finding that pain? Curiosity
Mhm.
is probably the answer, but where? How do you find what to be curious
Yeah,
about?
I think that's a good question, and I think that's also something that I associate as one of the good a skill that is needed in developer relations. And that's because imagine that you just joined the company and you want to build the developer profiles, or you want to lay out the path for that company. First of all, you need to know what their users are suffering, and you don't know. So you just joined. Well, you might know because sometimes you have used the product before, but imagine that you don't know anything. What you do is you interview the people that suffered, and you go through their pains. You're like, okay, what caused you pain into this? How did you struggle? Why did you struggle? And you need to be an empathetic person. And I think that's the main skill in DevRel in general. You need empathy, because if you don't have empathy, you won't be able to relate with other people's pains.
Mm,
And if you start relating with other people's pains, something you shouldn't do or could do, but I do it, and I feel like it's an issue that I have sometimes. Those pains become your pain, and
Mm,
that's kind of like, oh, this person suffered a lot with this issue. I've seen this person that suffered with this issue. I want to make this issue gone. I want to make, because I've seen this pain show for these people, and I don't want this person or this other person to have the pain anymore. That could be the first step, I would say. Like, talk with people that have pain. Um, yeah, I'm talking in a tech perspective, but that's why sometimes, like, something that gets lost is hearing stories from ancients, from parents, from grandparents, from great parents. Because, yeah, some people don't look at age as one thing, but there's experience there, and if you look
yeah.
into them and start thinking, okay, this was a story that they went through, something that happened, something they struggled with. This could be a great question. Ask someone older than you, what was the thing that caused them pain lately.
Yeah.
This I think we're getting very philosophical here, but this could be like a growth opportunity, because sometimes you
Yeah.
don't know what other people struggle, you don't know what other people go through. This could even be like
Yeah.
a very deep question to ask someone that you want to strengthen a friendship with. Tell me about something
Yeah.
you struggled with recently. It can be work, it can be personally, but you need empathy there. And empathy is something
Yeah.
that some people have, that some don't. It's hard to build. I think empathy comes from your life experiences and from your own pain sometimes, I guess. But if you don't have empathy, which is something that's I'm already thinking on different use cases. If you don't have empathy, at least try to listen and
Yeah.
try to understand. Okay, you can be analytical, you can not attach emotion to stuff, you can listen and think, okay, this is what this person suffered with. Okay, I'm being analytical, how would I fix this? Because every decision we make has some emotional factor into it, whether we know
Yeah.
it or not. um,
Yeah.
if we are aware, everything I do, like even like there's a bunch of Funko Pops behind me, these all things come from an emotional reaction of me enjoying superheroes and comic books, and also is fundamented from my background, where I didn't have as much toys I would like growing up. So these things kind of built the character that I have right now. I don't know, that can be that thing. I haven't done
Yeah.
therapy on that aspect as well, but everything that
Yeah.
who we are as a person come from our personal experience and our growth. So if we listen to other people, I would say, and at least genuinely hear them, not just hear them, because I think that's something that a lot of people have, is they hear but they don't hear.
Yeah. That's so cool. They hear, but they don't listen.
Yeah, exactly. Hear but they don't listen. So it, it's those times where you're like, where you're talking with someone and they bring out a fact about you that you randomly mentioned like 1 year ago or something like that. That these are my favorite people, because they're like, oh, this person generally pays attention to what I was saying, and this is when I saw, oh, maybe this person is friendship material, because they actually are caring about the
Yeah.
stuff that I was saying, even when I was casually mentioning those things. So I
Yeah.
went on a very different path
It's
from I think what
perfect.
your original question is, but that happens a lot with me. Sorry.
No, that's absolutely there's so many takeaways in there. I mean, the biggest takeaway is actually not even the biggest takeaway, but one big takeaway is the key skill for DevRel is empathy. I think that's absolutely, and for me, the biggest takeaway is pain is universal and everybody has it, and for those who don't feel like they have it because of immense privilege, because I have a huge inheritance and everything's taken care of, I know these people, what may help them is to find pain, if they can't find it in themselves, then in people around them. That is such a hack. I never thought about that. I think that's so cool, because not only are they then going to be more sensitive to other people's pain, but they're also going to use the resources that life has given them
Mhm.
to solve that. Whoa, I guess that's the decision point between being someone who wastes a bunch of dad's wealth versus being someone who like cures a long born
Yeah.
illness. Absolutely nuts. That is so great. Thank you for that. That has touched, as you were talking about that, honestly, I had like chills. I was like goosebumps here, because that is so beautiful. One final question I have for you is, you talk about passion being the key to great things, and passion coming from just having fun, and we've talked about passion in the context of a good talk, but really it seems like it's the key to a good
Mhm.
life. It's kind of cool that we got here, but in DevRel specifically, I've worked in places that were toxic. I will say that in a DevRel capacity, and because it was toxic. And by toxic, I'm happy to go into detail here. I do want to be sensitive to time, but if you want more details, you can always at me on social media. Toxic in the sense of inclusion. In multiple capacities, I was just not included, and things happened without my purview. And then I was accused of not doing anything, but I didn't even know anything was happening. So I was set up for failure in multiple DevRel positions. I had the experience where I was asked to run, but people put weights on my ankles, and then I was like, why aren't you and then people were like, why aren't you running? So I've had that experience a lot, both in terms of like DevRel activities, so speaking and content, but also in terms of developer experience stuff. Hey, give me feedback on this API we're exposing. And then I give the feedback, and it's either ignored or it's questioned beyond reason. And by that I mean, like, I'll provide citations. I'll be like, Daniel Afonso said this, David K. Piano said this, etc., etc. I have shown you stuff and gotten your feedback. And despite all of the corroboration and all of the citations and all of the feedback, it's like, cool, thanks, but I've been building software for 7 years and I have way more experience, so I'm just going to ignore that. And then what results is a product or an API that I'm like, oh, this could have been so much better for our target audience, but it's not. And then you expect me to go talk about this thing at a conference. Oh, I don't know. And I struggle with the passion there. So I feel like doing a great job in DevRel requires empathy, yes, but also it requires like believing in the product. Can you speak to that? And also, can you speak to how to best navigate, giving feedback so that you can then help shape a product you believe in and ultimately do great talks and create great content about it?
That's a very good topic. Because in starting from one of the struggles that you have, sometimes you're gonna have people that are gonna have friction. First of all, with you, that sometimes there's personal aspects that get into the way. Some people, they have biases, and for some reason they don't like someone's face, and like, okay, I don't want to hear from this person. I'm paying them something. I don't know. There's a lot of tech bros out there who think that their way is the way. That's something that might happen. I think that's important to be aware. There's gonna be some points where you're pitching stuff to people and you're like, this person is completely ignoring everything that I'm saying. The work that I did they're asking me to do this, but they don't care. So first of all, it's important to know that your value is not defined by what that person cares about you. I think that's an important thing that you should have with yourself. I think that's the first thing, because if you're tying your value to what your employer or people of you think about your opinion, then you're gonna have a very, very hard time, or at least you're gonna struggle a lot. And this is something that I've learned as well from experience. That should be the first way of looking into that. Next, that's the next part, which is, okay, I gave suggestion, my suggestion not being used, they deliver something completely different. How can I still be passionate about delivering or pitching this to people? Not pitching, or helping people grow with this. I think there's gonna be some small threads you can pick sometimes. Even if you don't have like the entire passion for the entire product because of all the decisions that were made about it, there can be small things that you like about it. There can be small things, or even if you don't like about it, there are going to be things that you're going to be like, okay, maybe I develop, this kind of fits my narrative, this kind of fits the target for this developer persona or this person that they are struggling with. So, okay, let's target this part and let's focus on this specific thing. Obviously, in DevRel, it's very nuanced, and sometimes they're going to expect you to pitch a new feature or whatever, but there's always some things that you're going to think from your personal experience, from what you know of your audience, that you can pick those small things. And once again, it only needs a spark to create an explosion or something like that. And the same thing happens with passion. If you find that very small thing, even if you're not fully happy with your experience, you can be partially happy with it. That's what happens with a bunch of people. They stay, like, remember, I don't think that happens a lot, but remember those people that stayed like 20, 30 years in the same company. They were not always happy, but they were partially happy. They could find passion on some things that they were doing, and that thing was enough for some of them. It isn't for me, but that's my biases already speaking. So I would say you can find passion on these smaller things and pitching them to people that you would feel would go through the same things. I don't remember if there was another question. What was the other part onto this?
Oh no, I think you answered it
But yeah, I
perfectly.
think like jobs are complex. I think that's the thing. Like there's never gonna be an ideal thing for a long time. I would say that's why there's all this rotation in the developer world always happening, because we might be happy in the beginning, we're happy for a couple of months, years sometimes, but there's, I think like the typical rotation is like 2 years or something, like the average right now.
Yeah.
After a bunch of time, people are like, yeah, I need to find something, because we're motivated by growth. I think that's one of the things that a
Yeah.
lot of tech people have. We're motivated by growth, so we need to find something that will keep challenging us and that'll take us to the next level, because there's so much we can do with the current knowledge that we have.
Yeah.
And if, for instance, there's going to be in a company, you're going to be like, that's why I stopped doing product development, because I came to a point where like, okay, I don't feel like there's anything for me to learn here from this perspective anymore. I need something that will push me on the next level. And then I transitioned. So obviously that's also another thing to do, but it's about finding challenges and things that make you grow as a person.
Yeah.
And for me, if I can help others grow in the process, then that's the ideal thing as well.
That's so great. You know, I was and I'm probably going to record an episode with her. I know this. I have this friend. Her name is Delphine Musso. She's arguably like the most established, confident, powerful businesswoman I know. I like she's on various boards. She's on the board of Decathlon. She's on the board of like 3 or 4 different companies,
Amazing.
and she's just this powerhouse. Yeah, she's incredible. And so I was talking with her on Sunday, and I said, Delphine, what does it actually mean to be on the board of a company? I don't like, you know, I'm not a business. I do run a business and so on, but like I'm not that businessy, so to speak. So I said, Delphine, what is it? And she said, well, it's simple. The board are a group of people who sit and represent all of the shareholders, all of the investors to the C-suite and to the like bigger investors. So you just sit there and sometimes they are bigger investors, but their purpose of being the board is to represent the shareholders. And she was explaining this to me really well. And she said something so profound. She said, usually as the board, you're responsible for staffing the C-suite and like replacing CEOs and CTOs and so on. Because what happens is, she says, a company like Decathlon, the company is going to live, and she drew like a timeline with her arms. She was like, it's going to live a long time, 50, 60s. There's companies that are 200-300 years old. And there's companies that are like companies like McDonald's and KFC and Starbucks. These are not hundreds of, as far as I know, they're not hundreds of years old, but they're still very, very old. And she said, so companies live long, but CEOs and employees last about 3 years, and then they need new challenges and they want to grow. And so as the board, you're responsible for recognizing, okay, when are people wanting to change? When do we need a change of leadership? And then facilitating that change. I think that's so cool that she recognized that even at the highest levels of leadership in companies, about 3-ish years or so is when you're just going to go. And I want to just draw the parallel there between that and what you said. It's just like that. And so I appreciate that. I also appreciate your advice on not identifying too much with what your employer says of you. I have fallen into the trap many times of saying, oh, they don't like my pull request. That means I'm not good. And so I
I
appreciate
have a
that.
very fun story about that. So, like the
Yeah.
first time I started doing front end, I joined the company. Like I was not used to working with GitHub back then, and I didn't know that if you comment on pull requests, you need to click on the comment, and you batch them. You need to click on the comment button after. I didn't know that, and I was like, I went to one of my full pull requests there, and I had like 20 comments or something like that. And then like 2 or 3 days went by, and they merged that pull request. I was like, why? But they ignored my comments. They didn't care, and I was like, and then this thing generated like some discomfort, anxiety, imposter syndrome to me, because it was the first time I was doing front end. It was in a new company. I didn't know anyone there, and I was not confident in speaking out as I am right now. So I spent like an entire week just like, oh, maybe I'm not good at my job. Maybe every comment that I did was sucked. It was terrible. But the punchline was, I didn't click on the comment button, and I was already tying my value to something that I expected people to give feedback for a mistake that I ended up doing. This is a very mess story, but I think it's completely. I reference to this story a lot when I'm thinking on what expectations the company has for me and some feedback that I got, because feedback should be there to make you grow. I think that's That's the
Yeah.
important thing. If sometimes feedback doesn't happen, you need to chase for it. And what happened was, after a week, I asked my new manager, like, "Oh, I commented on this pull request, and no, but they ignored my feedback." And he was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, let's look at that pull request together." And I was like, we opened the page, and I scrolled down. I was like, "Oh yeah, but you didn't comment it." And I was like, "Oh
Oh
my god!" I
man.
spent an entire week feeling bad about what I thought people perceived of me and how they were judging my knowledge, when there was a gap here that I completely didn't forgot to click on the button. I didn't know that I was supposed to click on that button. So I like to reference to this story a lot of times because, first of all, sometimes we assume other people think stuff of us when they don't actually do. Some people are going to be vocal, some aren't. That's what happens in jobs. That's what happens in life. But yeah, sometimes you can also think about on how you perceive on what were your actions that triggered this thing, or what did you miss
Yeah.
doing. I don't know. Take this
Yeah.
story as an example. However, someone wants to have it.
Yeah. No, that's so good. That's also part of my core value system, which is in a profession, especially in a professional environment, but in all environments, I have one job, and that is to show maximum honor to the context and the people. And oftentimes at work, that just means giving my absolute best in terms of output and effort and attention. And if I do that, that's the line. Like, it ends there. So if somebody thinks I'm not doing a good job, or if somebody, brings some accusation against me, that's absolutely good feedback I can use to learn, but it says absolutely nothing about the way I work, because I'm fully in control of and responsible of that. So absolutely, I agree. This also reminds me of something my friend Rick Warren says. He says it's always a good idea to turn your critics into your coaches. So somebody comes and says, "Hey, that was hostile. It was bad," or something, and he says, "Okay, what are they trying to
Yeah.
teach me here?" Um, yeah. Listen, Daniel, we could we could talk
Yeah,
another 2, 3, 4
exactly.
hours about this. I really appreciate you coming on this podcast and sharing so much information, from your process to creating such an influential talk with the comic books, to being on the program committee and writing great CFPs and getting them accepted, to even like deeper philosophical topics like passion and curiosity and where does it come from, and navigating the professional landscape. On behalf of me and everybody who listens, I just want to say the biggest thank you for sharing all of this.
Thank you for having
And
me.
I really appreciate it. Thanks again so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining my discussion with Daniel Afonso. So when are you going to speak at a conference? I hope you got out of it exactly what you wanted. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I hope to see you at the next conference if you put his protocols into action. Or if not, I hope you understand now how tech conferences work. I hope you learned something you maybe didn't know before. And if you did, I'd invite you to let me know in the comments or on social media. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, I'd invite you to leave up to a 5-star review on Apple and or Spotify. If you're witnessing this on YouTube, if you'd leave a thumbs up, subscribe, and leave a comment, that would help me. Honestly, all of this just helps me as like signals to understand, like, do I keep doing this or not. It really just helps me know that if this is valuable or not, and whether I should continue. My plan is to give it a try, and if nobody cares, then we'll stop it and spend my time on something better. In any case, thank you to the sponsors. Thank you to you for sticking around, for joining our discussion, and for your interest in engineering.